Well, if you've been to the cinema and watched the movie 2012, you know that it depicts the end of the world when human civilization becomes so vulnerable in the face of natural power. Climate change is not just about science, economy and politics, but also a philosophical question. What is our relationship with nature? Well, now could be the best time for us to rethink our future, how to find more intelligent ways to continue our growth while also achieving sustainable development. Although the benefits of averting global warming are incalculably large, the costs of doing so needn't be enormous. It's estimated that as little as 1% of global output could save our world after all. What mankind really needs is sharing, trusting and getting one's own work done. And this story shows us how China is shouldering its own responsibility.
Xia Jianzuo is a young white-collar worker living in downtown Beijing. Like many other young professionals, he starts his day with a thorough wash and a hot breakfast. But what he is unaware of is how big his carbon footprint is.
Carbon footprint? I've never heard of it.
A carbon footprint is the measure of the amount of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere as a person goes about his or her daily life. Xia Jianzuo says he's tried to be environmentally friendly. Even during the World Cup, he's limited his TV time to less than an hour a day. But with the rapid development of Beijing, technologies like cars and computers are just indispensable.
I live some 50 kilometers from my office. It takes about an hour by car and at least 3 hours by public transportation. I have to go and get to work on time. What do I give up for that? Well, maybe I won't shower as much this winter.
These are the kinds of choices being made by young Chinese who want to reduce their carbon emissions. At the same time, they must grapple with the question of whether their actions really make any difference. With a lamp, a microwave, a heater, and a car, Xia's morning leaves 11 kilograms of carbon footprint in the air, more than one fir tree can absorb in 3 years. And Xia concludes that's about it.
I can't take this to an extreme, you know. I mean, without showering, refrigerator, car, or heating, I'll be in the Jurassic era.
So what else can they do to help curb greenhouse gas emissions?
The
first thing one can do to reduce carbon footprint is to get smart about energy efficiency, not stop using home appliances. And it's the same with China. 80% of all Chinese electricity is produced as a result of burning fossil fuels. Turning it off would lead to thousands of workers out of a job.
Along a 4-kilometer road in rural southwestern Chongqing, villagers are using greener energy. Just like a sunflower positions itself towards the light, solar panels on the street lamps follow the sun's path across the sky each day. But the high-cost equipment means that electricity produced here is much more expensive than that produced from traditional fossil fuels like coal. And financing could be a problem. Ahead of the Copenhagen conference, China announced its plan to curb greenhouse gas emissions.
The Chinese government has decided to reduce the intensity of carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP in 2020 by 40 to 45% compared with the level of 2005. These measures will be included in the 12th five-year plan for economic and social development.
Research indicates the decision would cost the Chinese government up to 200 billion yuan, about $30 billion, each year. That means every Chinese household may end up paying 440 yuan, or about $64, a year in fees and taxes to help the nation fulfill its goal. For urban residents like Sha Jianzuo, sparing 440 yuan a year isn't that hard. But for people living on less than 13 yuan a day in rural China, this could be a matter of life and death.
Everyone in China will have to face incremental costs to improve their carbon efficiency, but ultimately such incremental costs will have to be shouldered by a percentage of city dwellers.
China faces challenges in controlling greenhouse gas emissions. The country has a large population, a relatively low economic development level, and is at a critical period in accelerating industrialization and urbanization. And it's the same with many other developing nations. That's why China says its action is voluntary, based on national conditions.
I need to stress it again. This move is a voluntary action. A voluntary action taken by the Chinese side out of free will. The measure is legally binding within the jurisdiction of our country, but we can't say that it is binding toward the international community.
Some, like the UN's climate chief, welcomed China's stance.
China also faces challenges in terms of energy prices, energy security and air quality. So there are a number of reasons why China is acting to limit the growth of emissions, to make industry more efficient, to have more renewable sources of energy. And I know that the Chinese administration is building on the plans that it already has to really come forward with an ambitious proposal in Copenhagen. And in that sense, I think China is already showing leadership.
Others claim China's carbon dioxide intensity declined by 50% from 1990 to 2003. That means a 40% cut over 20 years is not a significant improvement over the historical trend. Tim Herzog from the World Resources Institute sees it differently. In an article published online, he said it's not entirely fair to conclude that China's 40% target is business as usual. According to his observation, carbon intensities decline in countries that shift away from energy-intense industries. But the trend is the opposite in countries on the receiving end of those shifts. If carbon-intense industries like cement and steel continue to move to China, as is expected, then a 40% intensity target will be a significant goal in a global context. In fact, the problem is both simpler and cheaper to fix than most people think. The cost of averting an even bigger rise in temperature is put at a relatively small 1% of global output, a price it seems that many people are happy to pay.
Please, please, please do a deal in Copenhagen, and please, please, please make it market-based.
But humankind has to agree on how to share out the costs, both between and within countries. Uncertainty about the consequences of climate change makes it hard to persuade people to spend money on it. For where the damage is uncertain, so are the benefits of averting it. Yet uncertainty is also why we need to take the problem seriously. If we were sure that the temperature would rise by 2 to 3 degrees, then we could choose to live with that. But if it reaches the top end of the range, guesses about what the world would look like then read rather like science fiction.
Those activities which are emitting carbon dioxide are obviously imposing a cost on the earth, on humanity.
Now, the leaders coming together in Copenhagen also need to come to some sort of deal, even if it isn't a very good one. That will be a start. The national policies used to implement cuts need to be more efficient than the ones already in place so far. It requires leadership from politicians and support from their voters. The world is, in the end, in our own hands to transform Copenhagen into Hopenhagen.